Families are hard, especially big gatherings, because you will disagree and fight over anything and everything, be it career choices, politics, or even things like the decision to subscribe to the New World Review and thus receive regular JoJo content uploaded straight into your YouTube feed. Because you know there's always that one weird uncle who just doesn't want to do it. So don't be a weird uncle, hit the button. Hello and welcome to the New World Review, your source for everything anime and manga, and today it's time to delve deep into JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, quite specifically to examine the Joestar family tree. Now I know that there are other videos on the internet covering this, but to be honest, I don't care. This is as much to solidify my own understanding of the series as it is yours, plus the other videos don't have a sarcastic Australian man narrating, so we're all just going to sit here comfortably and enjoy the story of this complicated family. Before getting into things though, I should say that this is going to be a comprehensive family tree, meaning that it will include members all the way through to part 6 being Stone Ocean. Now I have tried to do my best to avoid any blatant spoilers of part 6 for anime only watchers, but by virtue of the very existence of certain characters, that's going to be, well, impossible, so you have been warned. And to kick things off properly, it may or may not be a good idea to state that you can generally spot a flesh and blood member of the Joestar family due to a rather conspicuous birthmark shaped like a gigantic star, which tends to appear on the exact same area of each of their bodies. Now the birthmark system may or may not be a foolproof method to detect Joestar, and we will get into some tricky situations that this family has gotten themselves into in that regard, but I guess I should also point out that not every confirmed Joestar family member has actually revealed this visible birthmark, but it is assumed to be on them. In any case, with that in mind, let's begin this bizarre family journey. And first up, we will begin with Joestar I. He serves as the oldest known member of the Joestar line, and he made a very decent living as a merchant and trader, who quite notably began the Joestar connection to the Brando family through his generosity and mercy towards one Dio Brando. Now George would also eventually meet a lovely lady, whom we have only ever seen a portrait of, but we know as Mary Joestar. However, rather tragically, Mary would pass away whilst accompanying George on a trip to London when their carriage fell into a ravine. Prior to her passing though, Mary and George had produced a spawn by the name of Jonathan Joestar, who was born in 1868 and would go on to become our very first titular JoJo, embarking on a bizarre adventure of his own during part 1 of the series known as Phantom Blood. Now Jonathan would also go on to become an archaeologist, and were he not quite possibly the most unfortunate man in all of media, I'm sure that he would have developed quite a profound career in that field. However, Jonathan would not be an only child, oddly enough, as due to George Joestar's connection to the Brando family, another child would be adopted into the household named Dio Brando, who would use the resources of the Joestar family to go on to become a professional brick, although in actuality he went on to become a lawyer. Is it redundant? I don't know, we'll leave that up to you. In any case, this was all while he was human, because Dio eventually discovered the existence of a stone mask and used its power to turn himself into a fearsome yet flamboyant vampire. In any case, Dio would end up murdering George Joestar and setting the stage for the main conflict of part 1 with Jonathan, where Dio is beaten repeatedly, only to reappear and terrorize Jonathan. Meanwhile, Jonathan had something of a childhood sweetheart named Erina Pendleton, who would eventually marry into the family and become Erina Joestar. Sadly though, after Erina had become pregnant, Dio's actions would result in the death of Jonathan, who attempted to ensure that Dio would be ended once and for all, whilst Erina would survive with both their unborn child and another infant who had lost their mother in the skirmish between Jonathan and Dio. And I should probably point out right now that Dio did also survive this event, and he would incorporate his disembodied vampire head onto the body of Jonathan Joestar, thus turning Dio into a being with legitimate Joestar blood, and single-handedly leading to the excessively complex nature of the Joestar family, which we will return to in due course. But for now, we're going to keep things as simple as we can. In any case, Erina and Jonathan's child was born in 1889, and he was given the name of George Joestar II, and he would grow up to become a pilot in the British Air Force, generally living a less than bizarre adventure and marrying a woman named Elizabeth Joestar. And very interestingly, Elizabeth was the baby that Erina Joestar had saved. And to clear up any potential weirdness of this here situation though, Elizabeth was not adopted into the Joestar family, nor did she and George grow up as siblings. Elizabeth was actually adopted by a family friend named Straizo, which is how she went on to become such a boss in the art of Harmon. In any case, she and George would meet and fall in love later in life, and go on to produce the ever iconic Joseph Joestar. Before we get into him though, there is some sad news regarding George II, as he was killed by a zombie officer created by Dio, after which point Elizabeth brutally slaughtered said officer and went into hiding, leaving Joseph under the guardianship of his now grandmother Erina. And Joseph, after all of this signifies the arrival of our second titular JoJo, as he helmed part 2 of the series being Battle Tendency, and a lot of this series focused on Joseph training in the art of Hamon in order to defeat a new threat to the world, being the Pillarmen. During this part, Joseph was trained by his mother actually, although Joseph did not know this fact, as she now went by the name of Lisa Lisa, and this led to at least one awkward moment for the readers and watchers of the series. At this point though, Lisa Lisa also had a maid named Suzuki, who Joseph took quite a liking to, and after the events of Battle Tendency, the two of them were swiftly married and had one daughter together named Holly Joestar. However, that would not be the end of, how shall I put this, Joseph's exploits, as much later on in life he would come to have an affair with a Japanese woman named Tomoko Higashikata, which resulted in her becoming pregnant and giving birth to Josuke Higashikata in 1983, and Josuke would be the main protagonist of part 4, Diamond is Unbreakable, living exclusively in the crazy, noisy, bizarre town that is Morio. But even this would not be the end of Joseph Joestar's familial acquisitions though, as on a trip to Morio at the age of 79, he became embroiled in the mystery of a baby who had a stand ability that allowed her to turn herself and everything within a spherical diameter invisible. And this was one of those many mysteries that was never really solved, as the baby's parents were never found, and so a very old Joseph decided to adopt her into the family, giving her the name of Shizuka Joestar, despite potentially incurring even more wrath of his already furious wife, Suzuki. But many of you may have noticed that we've jumped quite a bit here, talking about all this part 4 business when we have yet to even cover part 3, outrageous of me. To get into this though, we have to return to Joseph's daughter, Holly Joestar, who fell in love with a man named Sado Cujoh, who we as an audience have never seen, but that resulted in Holly moving to Japan, becoming Holly Cujoh, and giving birth to one son who would become the general face of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, Jotaro Kujo. And Jotaro would be our protagonist of part 3, Stardust Crusaders, in which he, his grandfather Joseph, 3 other dudes and a dog would travel across the world to defeat the newly re-emerged Dio, who was currently using the body of Jonathan Joestar. And very notably, it would be Jotaro who defeated Dio once and for all, putting an end to the Joestar Brando shenaniganry, or not I suppose, because by this time Dio had, he'd spread his seed around the world. I guess that's one way of putting it. Before we get into that though, we have the final and most recent generation of the Joestar family to deal with, as Jotaro would go on to marry and later divorce an unnamed woman, but their union would produce a daughter named Jolyne Kujo, who would be our titular JoJo for part 6, being Stone Ocean, where things go so far off the rails that the Joestar line simply does not progress beyond Jolyne. Or I mean, technically it might, but we certainly aren't privy to that information. But I am afraid that we are far from ending this video here, because now we have to move all the way back to Dio, who got quite busy with Jonathan's body, most notably engaging in the deed to produce a child in 1985 who would become known as Giorno Giovanna, the protagonist of part 5, Golden Wind. And here's a fun fact: due to Giorno being produced of Jonathan Joestar's body, he is very technically the uncle of a very old at this point Joseph Joestar, as well as the grand uncle of Holly, the great grand uncle of Jotaro, and even more crazily, despite being only 8 years older than Jolyne, this would make Giorno Jolyne's great grand uncle. But Giorno very much acts as something of the ultimate fusion between Joestar and Brando heritage, inheriting a fair bit from both of his familial polar opposites to create a very unique existence. And speaking of unique existences, let's examine arguably the most bizarre member of the Joestar family, who is known only as Green Baby. So this little guy exists in part 6, and he is born from a combination of Dio's bone and a cluster of souls. Despite this, it does bear the traditional Joestar family birthmark, and really it only exists for like a day before it fuses with Enrico Pucci to create a very strange being indeed. And here is where things get even weirder, because I guess if you really wanted to, you could potentially include Enrico into the Joestar family tree, because it is technically a physical incorporation of Joestar DNA, like what happened when Dio took over Jonathan's body, just much more complicated and obscure. And the complications and obscurity do not stop there, because this did not just result in a change in Enrico, but it also affected his twin brother Weather Report, who ended up with a Joestar birthmark as well after Enrico's fusion. Now the argument for including Weather Report in the Joestar family is much more flimsy than the one for Pucci, but it is kind of undeniable that his biology did change in some way, even if it was just to give him the birthmark. So look, we're just gonna leave Weather Report right here to be safe, because this is a bizarre family on a bizarre adventure, and this is a very bizarre occurrence. Moving back once again to Dio though, he would go on to have at least 3 more children to 3 different unnamed women, all of whom appear in part 6, the children that is, not the women. The first of which is Donatello Versus, who according to the JoJo wiki has an occupation of has never been employed, but in addition to him there is also Rikiel and Ungalo, and these 3 would become antagonists of part 6, with Ungalo in particular wielding an absurdly powerful stand known as Bohemian Rhapsody. A very underrated stand, by the way, because a lot of people claim that it is the easiest thing in the world to beat because it does provide its own defeat mechanism. But then those very same people rather conveniently forget that if Weather Report had not gotten extraordinarily lucky and run into Vincent van Gogh, who drew a funky character for him, then he would have been destroyed by Bohemian Rhapsody along with everyone else. That is a condensed shot of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure right there. But with that minor rant out of the way, I think I can finally, maybe safely say that this is the entire JoJo family tree as we currently know it. And yeah, there might be some more controversial members amongst them like Pucci and Weather Report, but the more I think about it, the more I've come to accept that they were very much engulfed into this familial heritage one way or another. And very notably, this family tree is not going to explore the Steel Ball Run universe because I feel like we have covered more than enough madness for one video, and if you would like me to do one separately for that alternate universe, then please do let me know in the comments below, because there is actually a really strange amount to explore in that regard as well. But that pretty much does it for the Joestar family tree. But what do you guys think? Please do let me know down in the comments below, or even join my Discord server. And if you're keen for some more JoJo content, then please do check out some of my other videos, or even subscribe to the channel for regular JoJo wonder delivered straight into your YouTube feed. But for now, this has been the New World Review, and I'll see you next time.